This week we're focusing on research. Now, again, this is the only week in the course that a chapter will be split between 2 weeks. From here on out, it is always one chapter per week. So please take note of that. This is week 2, but we're still in chapter 1. Now, in every chapter, the textbook repeatedly refers to research. In the extra examples I include, I refer to research. This is a phrase you'll often hear people just randomly include in their conversations, usually when they're trying to prove themselves right about something, or even just to persuade you or someone else that their point of view is the right one. Well, research indicates, or I saw a report on the news and it said that new research had been done. Or we'll see these odd little surveys and questionnaires, that kind of thing online. What does that mean? Who conducted the research? Was it a research firm? Was it some kind of popular website? What kind of research method was used? How many people were studied? 100 or 5,000? Was the research conducted ethically? Were people paid to participate or not, which might affect their participation? Did they know they were being studied, which might also affect their behavior if they know that people are watching them? For me, the questions go on, ending with wanting to know if it was valid research. Was it conducted well? In other words, to use a very unacademic phrase, was it good research so that the results should be taken seriously? Or was it really poorly conducted research that was just thrown together so you shouldn't give the results the time of day? This is why, since I began studying sociology as an undergrad student, which just happened to be at Nipissing, I've tended to take research results in popular media with a grain of salt. After studying how research was actually conducted and how to analyze the results, I never look at the results of any kind of study again in the same way. And I don't mean analyze in a really close scientific way. I mean just asking some basic questions like I just suggested. Because I learned how easy it is to lie with research results, to make the results say what you want them to say, to interpret the results in such a manner that they're leaning towards what you want them to say anyways. Sorry, I'm just trying to flip a page here and one of my cats is in the way. It's very easy to get the results you want to get because of the kinds of questions you ask. Maybe how you ask them. So it's a biased question or a leading question. Basically, I learned how easy it is to lie with statistics. In fact, when I was in graduate school, one of the books I had to buy for my research methods course was called How to Lie with Statistics. Not teaching us how to do it, but so we would learn how easy it is to manipulate things. So studying research methods, I learned at least how easy it is to manipulate people's perspectives and their opinions with research results. Now, the term research, what is that? It's just the process of systematically observing reality to assess the validity of a theory. So take note of the word systematically. You can potentially study anything you want if you have the interest and the time or the money necessary to do so, because conducting research often costs money. Now, the textbook hops right into this by explaining the research cycle and the 6 steps involved. But before we get to this, I want to talk about ethics and research first, because this is something that must necessarily be taken into account, no matter what the subject or how the research will be conducted. I have a particular interest in ethics. When I was in graduate school, my focus in my master's was reproductive technology, in vitro fertilization, surrogacy, egg donation, sperm donation, all of that, and the ethics involved with that in terms of the rights of the children conceived. And I always thought, if I had the money and if life had gone a bit differently, I would have turned out to be a medical ethicist. I don't quite know where I'd find employment as that, but that's what I was interested in. So I quite enjoy discussing ethics and morality when it comes to research. When you conduct research in the social sciences, it is extremely important to take into account ethical considerations and moral considerations. And whether you want to be ethical in your research or not, at this point in history, you don't have any choice because there are laws in this regard now. Haven't always been, but there are now. A person can't just study whatever they want, in whatever way they want, with no regard for morals or ethics. These days, it's simply not possible. And although the title of this part of the chapter, Ethics in Sociological Research, obviously refers specifically to sociology, because this is a sociology course, the information provided about ethics and morals in research practices actually applies to all disciplines, no matter who the researchers are, what their area of study is, what the purpose of their research is, or who the participants are. So the textbook points out that when research is conducted, a researcher must, in all situations, respect the rights of potential respondents or participants. And this means something very specific. This isn't just some vague statement, some vague philosophical idea. Respecting the rights of subjects means paying attention to very, very specific things. So, let's get the slide moving. Safety. And you might think, well, of course you have to make sure people are safe. But respecting the rights of subjects means that as the researcher, you must do the subjects no harm. That's a very common phrase you'll hear in research. The subjects must be safe at all times, not just physically, but emotionally and socially. So if a researcher can't guarantee a subject's safety in all ways, then the research can't be done. And please note that I pointed out this is much more than physical safety. If a subject is going to find themselves suffering from any kind of emotional trauma as a result of the research of what it involves, if they're going to suffer some kind of social trauma and be stigmatized, for example, that is an ethical problem, and it means that the researchers cannot guarantee their safety. So I think at some point I'm going to refer to the Stanford prison experiment. That is a good example of emotional trauma after research is done. Secondly, the researcher has to respect a subject's rights, meaning they have a right to privacy. If they don't want their behaviors or their attitudes or their thoughts or their feelings made public, then they cannot be made public. And sometimes research is very general in nature, and you think it's focused on a simple topic, but sometimes it's focused on something that is highly, highly sensitive. So, for example, research regarding veterans and PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. In both situations, the subject does have a right to privacy, and you might look at a topic and not understand why a subject feels that they want their feedback to you to remain private, because to you, it's not a big deal. Further on this week, I'm going to use an example about road maintenance. So let's say you survey somebody about their opinion of road maintenance in the city, and they don't want their opinion to be made public, and you're thinking, what's the big deal? It's about road maintenance. But it's their right, whether you like it or not. With this, subjects have a right to confidentiality, meaning it cannot be possible for data collected from them to be traced back to them. This is linked to the right to privacy, to remain anonymous, to not be identified. So, for example, it's not unusual for questionnaires, surveys, to be coded in order to ensure the answers cannot be traced back to the respondent. So there's no name on them, it's just a code. Now, the textbook also makes the point that subjects have to be told how the information they provide will be used, again, so that they know what they're agreeing to. And a very, very common term you're going to hear in regards to research is informed consent. What this means is the person is going to still willingly participate after being informed of all aspects. And that's really key. They are informed, but they're still participating. You're going to hear this concept of informed consent over and over and over. Essentially, they have been honestly told what they're getting into, what will be involved, including any potential risk, not just physical, but emotional and social. It means telling potential research respondents all aspects of the research that might reasonably influence their decision to participate. They've been completely informed, and they still consent to participate. This is a key term. And it's kind of a catch-all term to describe that research is ethical or moral. Not in a negative way, it's just kind of used as a summary phrase in research often. Now, perhaps the best way to demonstrate ethical and moral issues in research is to review a well-known example when these concerns were not given much consideration at all. In the last week about sociological theory, I mentioned what is referred to as the forbidden experiment. Purposely isolating somebody to study the effects of that isolation that would obviously raise ethical and moral concerns. That is a clear example of research that would never take place because it violates everything I've just reviewed. But I'm going to give you an example of a very well-known case of research when these things were not considered at all and occurred really not that long ago, yet the research occurred. The Tuskegee syphilis study is very, very well known. It was conducted from 1932 to 1972 by the United States Health Service. Now, the true purpose of this experiment was to observe the natural progression of untreated syphilis in rural African American men in Alabama under the guise or pretending to provide them free health care from the U.S. government. So I want you to think about what I just said. Syphilis being left untreated to see how it would progress without the participants being aware that is the purpose of the study. Instead, they were told that the study is about improving health care in general. And at the time in 1932, there was no known effective treatment for syphilis the year the study started. Now, syphilis is a disease that is usually transmitted sexually, and most people think that is the only manner in which it can be transmitted, but actually it can also be transmitted from mother to child during pregnancy or at birth. So even though women were not being studied, they could potentially contract the disease during intercourse from somebody who was in the study and not being treated, and then unknowingly pass it to their child during birth. So in collaboration with Tuskegee University, researchers from the U.S. government enrolled approximately 600 African American men, all of which were very, very poor in a community in Alabama. Now, when the study began, about 2/3 of the men had the disease and 1/3 did not. These men freely agreed to participate. They freely agreed to be examined. There was no intimidation or coercion at all on the surface. But they thought that the main reason for the study was that, yes, they'd be treated for syphilis if they had it, and if not, they were told they had what was called bad blood. Now, to say that somebody had bad blood at this time, this was like a common catch-all term used at the time for a variety of health complaints. So if somebody was feeling run down all the time, or if they were tired and fatigued all the time, if they generally didn't feel very well on a regular basis, oh, they have bad blood. So the men were given periodic assessments during which they were told they were being given treatment, either for syphilis if they had it or for bad blood, when in fact they were not. The treatment all of them were given was actually a placebo, simply vitamin supplements and aspirin. And keep in mind, the doctors and the researchers knew this would have no effect on syphilis. But these participants were extremely poor. They were impoverished. And this promise of free medical care, and they were provided some meals. And in addition, they were given free burial insurance for participating in the study for 6 months, was something they simply couldn't turn down. So they were so impoverished that they knew that if they had died, their families could not afford to bury them. They were not just lower class, they were extremely poor. The thing is, by 1947, so the study started in 32, by 1947, penicillin had become the standard treatment for syphilis, and they knew it would have an effect. But the researchers involved with the Tuskegee study continued the study without treating any participants. They purposely withheld penicillin from the men, and they even held information about this new effective treatment from the men. They wanted the study to continue. These researchers went further and even took steps to prevent these men from accessing syphilis treatment programs available to other residents in their area. So in other words, they did what they could to make sure anybody participating in the study would not have an opportunity to access effective health care somewhere else. This study continued until 1972, and it only ended in 72 because a young doctor who became aware of it, I'm paraphrasing and summarizing quite briefly here, went to the people who headed the study, obviously said to them, this is wrong, da-da-da-da-da. They said, no, we're continuing. So he finally went to the press and leaked it to the press, and that's how the study was ended because it became public. Throughout this entire time, researchers provided no effective care for the participants in the study, as the men died, some went blind, some suffered from mental health problems and became insane, or they experienced other severe health problems due to their untreated syphilis. By the end of the study, 28 people had died, 100 had died from related diseases, 40 women were infected, and 19 children were infected with syphilis during pregnancy or childbirth. So clearly, there are several ethical and moral problems with this study. Every single ethical and moral consideration I outlined was completely ignored. The first of which being, the researchers didn't even attempt to provide safety for the subjects in various ways. There was no thought of do no harm. Instead, they actually withheld or interfered with treatment for research purposes. There was little to no privacy provided, no confidentiality regarding information collected. I mean, like, I have pictures here that you've looked at of people who were participating. Participants had no idea for what purpose the information collected about them would be used, because they didn't know what information was really being collected. So overall, there was no informed consent in any way. Now, I said that people participated willingly and there was no coercion. However, there was also the issue of they did feel pressured to participate. So that's not entirely true, as it's widely acknowledged now that the researchers took advantage of these men who were living in impoverished conditions. Even though they were adults, some had never had any kind of health care ever in their life. Some had never seen a doctor before. The majority of them had very low levels of education, and because of this, they viewed the people they had contact with for the experiment from the United States Health Service, sounding very official, the doctors and the nurses and the researchers as authority figures, as experts, as people they should defer to because they were formally educated. So once the Tuskegee syphilis study was exposed, it led to major changes in U.S. law, including new regulations regarding the protection of participants in clinical studies. And now, as I said, research requires informed consent, the clear communication of a diagnosis, if applicable in the situation, and accurate reporting of test results to participants. So the Tuskegee syphilis study is cited as, quote, arguably the most infamous biomedical research study in U.S. history, end quote. And from our perspective now, and from our society's focus on human rights, it is stunning to think that this happened in North America and that it went on for as long as it did with no regard at all for the men involved. I mean, how could somebody do that?